Good morning, everyone. We are just about to get started here. We're just going to give everyone a couple more minutes to make sure we have everyone before we start. All right. Looks like we have quite a few attendees this morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I think we'll get started. So we are here today to talk to you about the RFP that we put out for technical assistance providers for the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project. We really want to thank you for joining us in this challenging time. We know you're all probably working from home and listening in from home, as we are as well. So we ask you to bear with us as well, since we're all working remotely. But hopefully this will all go smoothly. So I think we'll just start off with a quick round of introductions. I can start. My name is Ina Lupin. I'm the Community Assistance Program Manager at the Strategic Growth Council and manage a number of our technical assistance contracts. And then we have a couple of folks from CARB on the line as well, the Air Resources Board. Maybe we can go to Leslie. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you. I'm also with CARB, and I'm in the Sustainable Transportation and Communities Division, and I'll be working with Ina on this project with you.
Great. And then Bree, if you could also introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. This is Bree Swenson. I'm the project lead for STEP at CARB.
Great. All right. Bree is going to be driving for us today and advancing our slides and sort of organizing our questions. So Bree, actually, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. And also I wanted to mention that as we are going through these slides, feel free to type any questions that come up in the chat. We'll be stopping once during this in the middle of the slides to respond to some questions, and then we'll also respond to questions at the end. If you would like to ask your question out loud, feel free to just click the raise your hand button, and then we will unmute you and allow you to ask your question. So just going through the agenda very quickly. We're going to go through a little bit of background on our technical assistance program and both of the agencies that have come together to partner on this project. A little overview of the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project. We'll go through the scope of work for the technical assistance, required and preferred qualifications that we're looking for in terms of our providers, the package that we'll ask you to put together as part of your proposal, the evaluation process, the timeline for contracting, and then we'll open it up for a last bit of question and answer. You go to the next slide. Great. So just a little bit of framing here. This both STEP and the Technical Assistance Program are California Climate Investments programs. They're funded through cap and trade. And so their goal is really to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while also strengthening the economy, improving public health and the environment, particularly in disadvantaged communities, which is the focus both of the STEP program and our technical assistance program at the Strategic Growth Council. We just wanted to also introduce the agencies for those of you who may not be familiar with them. The Air Resources Board develops programs and actions that protect the public from the harmful effects of air pollution and fight climate change. And STEP is part of the low carbon transportation investments, which are working on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, criteria, pollutant, and toxic air contaminant emissions through the deployment of advanced technology, clean transportation in light duty and heavy duty sectors. The Strategic Growth Council, for those of you who are not familiar, we are a cabinet level body that sort of works across state agencies and with a number of different partners to promote sustainability, equity, economic prosperity, and quality of life for all Californians. We have a number of grant programs at the Strategic Growth Council, as well as many policy initiatives. And then sort of the third bucket of our work is capacity building and technical assistance, which is what this project will fall under. So if we could go on to the next slide, just to talk here. Oh, sorry, the last one. Thanks. Our technical assistance program is focused on California climate investments programs. We've been around since 2015, 2016, and have been providing technical assistance to low-income and disadvantaged communities across the state to help them apply for a number of different California climate investments programs. We can go to the next slide. And so the main goals of our program are to focus on direct assistance, which is really, application assistance and implementation assistance in some cases. But we also want to think about capacity building and how to sort of build skills, partnerships, education, and all of the different pieces that need to come together in a community to be able to assemble California climate investments proposals moving forward. So we're really trying to work on the long-term view as well of capacity building in California. We also are looking to bring together California climate investments programs in a more holistic way. Can go to the next slide. And then with that, I will hand it off to Leslie, who will give us an overview of the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project.
Great, thanks, Ina. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about STEP, and then we'll go into more of the details of the scope of work. STEP is a new transportation equity pilot project within CARB's low carbon transportation program, which is funded by the California Climate Investments. STEP works to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provides benefits to residents of disadvantaged communities throughout California. Next slide. So the goal of STEP is to address community residents' transportation needs, increase access to key destinations, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. STEP has the flexibility to fund many different projects to ensure unique community transportation needs are addressed. And STEP will increase transportation equity in disadvantaged and low-income communities throughout California through two types of grants. First is the planning and capacity building grants, and the second are the implementation grants. And in the next slide, I'll give you a quick overview of these grants. So for the implementation grants, there's $20 million for about 1 to 3 grantees for the purpose of increasing residents' access to key destinations. This is so they can travel without needing a personal vehicle. The objectives are to increase transportation equity by 1, addressing disadvantaged community residents' transportation needs through a resident-led decision-making process. Secondly, to increase access to key destinations to benefit residents of disadvantaged communities. And third, to increase clean mobility options that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. So eligible applicants must include partnerships between a lead applicant, a co-applicant, and community partners. At least one of the applicants, however, must be a local government. For the planning and capacity building grants, $2 million is available for multiple grantees. And the objective is to facilitate transportation equity by identifying disadvantaged or low-income community residents' transportation needs, and to prepare for and prioritize projects that will increase clean mobility and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to benefit these communities. So next we'll go over the timeline. So the tentative grant timeline shows that the public comments on STEP draft criteria and requirements are due April 3rd. So it's not too late to submit your comments. We anticipate that the STEP solicitation will open in June, with applications due sometime between mid-August to the end of the month. You might be wondering, given the current COVID-19 emergency, how that might affect the schedule. And we're just continuing to monitor the situation, and we will notify the public as we learn more. The STEP recipients will be selected in September, with draft agreements submitted for CARB approval in November. And then final grant agreements are expected to be submitted to CARB about a year from now for up to a 4-year grant term. The expenditure deadline for STEP funds is February 28th of 2025. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment, and if you have any questions about the STEP program, our STEP lead, Brianna Swenson, is here to answer for you, and she'll look at your questions through the Q&A chat box, or if you want to raise your hand, she'll unmute you.
Thanks, Leslie. So we really just want to focus the questions right now on if you have any clarifying questions about STEP itself. We're going to go through the whole technical assistance scope of work and the RFP process, and then we'll take questions about the RFP after that. So I see, let's see, I see a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to skip over the ones that are related to the RFP, and we'll come back to those at the end, okay? So Brian, I see your questions. We've got one from Brian Barnacle. How many planning and capacity building applicants are expected to be supported? This is actually kind of gets into the TA stuff, but we are expecting, we have to provide kind of this opportunity for technical assistance to everyone who's interested. So we're expecting that any applicants who are interested in getting technical assistance support will be able to get technical assistance support. The planning and capacity building support is much less than the implementation grant support, but we'll get into that later. Brittany Brown asked, will these slides be available via email? Yes, we're going to send them out over email. And we will also send out the webinar, that a recorded version of the webinar. Brian Barnacle asked, is the planning and capacity building grant a rolling application? So for STEP, we have a standard solicitation period. So we're not going to evaluate any of the applications for either the planning and capacity building grant or the implementation grant until the end of the solicitation deadline of mid-August or whenever it actually happens. I think Jamila, I think I already answered your question about the slides. And then Gary Shu, is the STEP program offered as a one-time 4-year-long program, or is it a rolling program with new funding available each year? Currently, we only have 1 year of funding. This is a new pilot project. It's part of the low carbon transportation program, which receives an appropriation from the legislature every year. So once CARB gets that appropriation from the legislature, staff goes through a 6-month-long process to figure out where to allocate those funds between the various pilot projects and programs that are under the low carbon transportation investments. We're in the process of doing that right now for fiscal year 2021 funds. We actually create a funding plan that goes out as a draft for the public to see, and then in October it goes to our board for approval. So if your STEP is, we're recommending that STEP get funds in the future, but based on what the what the budget actually looks like at the end of when the legislature is done with it, and based on what the needs are, especially come the end of our quarantine time, then we may see some differences in what the funding plan will look like. So we can't really guarantee that we'll have funds in the future, but we'd like to see them continue, obviously. Let's see, does anyone have their hands raised? I don't see any hands raised. Last call for questions about the program, and then we'll move on to the TA side of things. All right, let's go ahead and go on.
Great, thank you, Bree. Yeah, so now I'm going to go into the STEP technical assistant task, and then Ina will follow on with discussing the qualifications and the RFP itself. Next slide. So for this RFP, there's a combined total of $400,000 in SGC and CARB funds to be awarded. SGC is coordinating with CARB to competitively select and administer the contract. And the contractor will support up to 10 applicants for planning capacity building grants and about 1 to 3 implementation grants. So we expect maybe 10 to 20 applicants for the planning grants and maybe about 10 for the implementation grants, for a total of between 10 and 30 applications. The SGC will provide staff expertise, oversight, and project management for the TA contract. And CARB will coordinate very closely with SGC and provide subject matter expertise. Next slide. So the role of the TA contractor, I'll give an overview here. The selected contractor will support applicants during proposal development and implementation of STEP funds. The contractor will evaluate applicant readiness to apply, assist applicants with understanding eligibility threshold requirements, meeting proposal requirements, and technical support. And that includes specific quantification and mapping support. Also, the contractor will provide context-specific support for grant recipients, including data collection and reporting support. And finally, sharing lessons learned with CARB and SGC based on the technical assistance provided during the proposal development and the grant implementation. Next slide. So I just want to go over some of the guiding principles for TA applicants, and just in order for you to better understand what our priorities are. STEP's overarching purpose is to increase transportation equity so that a community's transportation system provides safe, reliable, environmentally sustainable, accessible, and affordable transportation options for all. And this includes communities that have been disproportionately impacted by pollution or lack of services. It's important to prioritize community engagement in the decision-making process and avoid unintended consequences that occur without local engagement. Technical assistance must be context-specific and adaptable to reflect the varying needs of different applicants or recipients of STEP funds. The TA contractors will focus on capacity building in a way that helps applicants or recipients learn how to complete tasks rather than completing it for them. And the TA contractor will work closely with local implementers and community groups to help facilitate this assistance. Next slide. So here's an overview of the 4 primary roles: administrative coordination and reporting, implementation, grant proposal development support, implementation grant recipient support, and then planning and capacity building grant support. So I'll go into a little more detail on each of those. Next slide. So for administrative coordination and reporting, at the kickoff meeting with SGC and CARB, the contractor will learn about a little bit more about STEP and prepare for the solicitation period. It will also be an opportunity to discuss the work plan with SGC and CARB. Once the work is in progress, the contractor will have regular check-ins with CARB and SGC and keep notes of all the meetings, with the next steps and then submit them to CARB and SGC. The contractor will provide an initial evaluation of applicant readiness and then report quarterly on progress made. The contractor will provide a post-solicitation draft report that includes summaries of applicant assistance during the solicitation period, the type of TA provided, as well as the successes and challenges faced during the application development and coordination. The contractor will make recommendations on how to improve and streamline the process in future rounds of technical assistance. So the quarterly reports will document the hours of TA assistance, the progress of STEP applicants in submitting a competitive proposal or implementing projects, along with the challenges that applicants or recipients face. A final report will be submitted at the end of the contract on the best practices and lessons learned. Moving on to the implementation grant proposal development support. During the proposal development phase, the TA contractor will provide project management support with regular check-ins and help to answer any questions and resolve challenges. The contractor will also provide technical expertise on project eligibility and readiness thresholds and guide applicants on integrating the project so that it maximizes community benefits. The contractor will support GIS mapping to define the STEP community geographic boundary and the proposed project locations and the disadvantaged community census tracts within the community. And the contractor will provide resources on and support community engagement and partnerships, as well as decision-making activities during the project development and help with prioritization and design. An important role of the contractor is to conduct a final review of each proposal's completeness before submittal. Another area of TA support is for quantification of GHG reductions and selected co-benefits. The contractor will develop a work plan and timeline with each applicant and conduct regular in-person and phone meetings. Next slide. So regarding the quantification of GHG reductions and selected co-benefits, the TA provider will help the applicants identify eligible projects for which GHG emission reductions can be estimated using the CARB-approved quantification methodologies and related data inputs needed to calculate the estimates. The TA provider will help the applicant enter all of this information into the STEP benefits calculator and provide supporting documentation for the estimates. These estimates will be recalculated based on the final project information. Yeah, moving on to the implementation grant recipient support. The TA contractor will meet with each of the recipients and help to draft a work plan for the funded grants that identified specific TA needs for implementation. The contractor will then work closely with each recipient to develop a work plan and timeline to meet the milestones and deadlines. Regular meetings will be important to check in on progress and provide support to resolve any major issues that arise. So the contractor will work with CARB and applicants to identify community-based organizations that will provide community-specific technical assistance. The contractor will then support the identified community-based organizations on community engagement as well as community decision-making throughout the iterative project design and implementation phases. The TA contractor will provide technical expertise and resources, including best practices and lessons learned from other pilot projects to facilitate design and implementation of funded projects. Another important task is to work with recipients to coordinate data tracking and reporting for each funded project on a quarterly basis. This includes data required for California climate investments reporting to CARB, as well as data requested by third-party researchers contracted to evaluate STEP and projects funded by STEP. Finally, next slide, the planning and capacity building grant support. The TA contractor will provide GIS mapping support for the STEP community boundary and project location mapping for the applicant's proposal. Secondly, to share information with applicants about other grant opportunities that could support the implementation of plans created by the STEP planning and capacity building grants. CARB will provide the contractor with the contact information for all planning grant recipients. Well, that wraps up my portion, and I'd like to hand it back to Ina, and we'll take questions after she has concluded her presentation.
Great, thank you, Leslie. So now we're just going to walk through some of the nuts and bolts of the contracting process, starting with qualifications that we're asking for. We could go, great. So we have a list here of, of all of the qualifications that are required as threshold. So at least 2 years of experience of providing technical assistance or proposal grant writing, at least 2 years of experience in urban planning and community development, at least 2 years in coordinating public, private, and nonprofit organizations or serving as a project manager with such entities, 2 years of experience working with state grant programs, 2 years working directly with disadvantaged and or low-income communities or tribal communities, at least 2 years of experience managing transportation projects, such as active transportation, fixed route transit, shared mobility projects, and then also, again, 2 years of experience communicating with stakeholders about quantitative data or GHG quantification, and then 2 years of experience with mapping and ArcGIS. These are the threshold that we're really requiring all of the proposals to have, at least on their team. So it's not the case that absolutely every person on the team needs to have all of this experience, but as a whole, the team needs to have this experience on board. So if we could go to the next slide. With that, we'll also talk through just a little bit some of our preferred experience. This is not threshold, but just the kinds of things that we will be looking for when we review proposals. We're looking for technical knowledge and experience in community engagement or decision making, transportation equity project implementation, workforce development programming, community engagement, displacement avoidance, connections between housing and transportation, and members of the team that are able to communicate in some of California's most common languages other than English. And then we also wanted to just mention, this may be something that you know already, but for many of our technical assistance contracts, we really encourage teams to come together to work with one another that have kind of different expertise that they can bring to the table. And so that's the case for this proposal as well. Now we'll just walk through the package that we're asking you to put together as part of your proposal. These are the different components that we're asking for as part of the proposal. There's more information in the RFP on each one that really details the formatting and all of the nuts and bolts, but we'll just go through some of the meatier ones here. So response to the scope of work, we're asking for a summary with an overview of the project that's less than a page. Also looking for a project management plan that really shows the management structure, including subcontractors, and shows that there is a clear project manager who will be able to assign tasks and manage sort of potentially larger teams if that ends up being what the contractor decides to do. We're looking for you to talk to us about your methodology and approach, including specific techniques and methods you'll be using, as well as administrative and operational management expertise. Also looking for work plan and work schedule information, identifying all of the tasks and milestones and deliverables, and estimated hours for each task, as well as the supervision strategy to ensure timeliness and task management. We also want this for subcontractors as well. Then we're asking for a proof of the minimum qualifications that I underlined earlier. So we're looking for you to really explain how you meet all of these qualifications or potentially exceed them, and submit applicable documentation and work samples as appropriate. We would also like team resumes for everyone on the team, as well as a table that shows the minimum qualifications being met by all of the folks that are assembled on the team. And then lastly, we ask for 3 reference forms. As far as the budget, we have in the RFP package that's posted on Cali Procure, you'll find attachment 13, which is the contractor cost sheet. And that is a template that you can work with and feel free to modify as to fit your needs. But we are looking for you to include all of the identification of position and classification titles. Please don't list names. This is because if ever there's any turnover in your team, we would have to go back and do an amendment, which is time consuming for everyone. So just asking for the position or classification here. Salary rates and fringe benefits. Quick reminder that rates are capped at what you say in your proposal, so keep that in mind as you're putting your proposal together. The percentage of time devoted to the work, operating expenses, travel. Please take a look at the CalHR website, which has some information on, you know, the specific amount of that you can spend on per diem food, for example, or hotels, all of the different requirements that we have for state contracting. We also have a cap of 20% for overhead costs and are looking for subcontractors to also have their cost details as part of this budget as well. And then any other costs that you think that you might incur. This is a list of the attachments that you will find in the on Cali Procure with the package of that goes along with the RFP. I will not go through all of these, but you can just note that all of the asterisks here are the ones that are required. I highlighted the bidder declaration form. This one is really important. Please, please, please fill it out. I have heard in the past had to turn down proposals that did not include the bidder declaration form. So of all of the attachments, that is the most important one to remember, that it must be a part of the proposal, but include all of them that are required, please. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. So I just wanted to walk through a little bit our evaluation process as well. We start off with an administrative evaluation, which is pass-fail. We're just trying to make sure that your proposal is complete and that you meet the minimum qualification thresholds. We also, you know, just another note here about the bidder's declaration form. We may contact you about other components of your proposal if we need additional clarification or documentation. But again, we legally aren't able to ask you to give us your bidder's declaration form if you've forgotten to include it. So then we'll go into the technical evaluation. And we have 100 points here. We'll have a team of reviewers that will be sort of reviewing each one of the applications. We start with clarity and organization of your proposal for 10 points, approach to scope of work, which is overall 20 points, including both your project management plan and then your approach and methodology for 10 points as well. Your work plan and schedule, which is 15 points, and then your experience as you know across your team, which accounts for 55 points. And so here we're looking for a number of the things that I already mentioned, but expertise in project management, experience providing technical assistance and capacity building, subject matter working with communities to implement equitable community engagement and decision making. And I just want to note this one is worth 15 points. and then also experience in management and development of transportation and community development projects, as well as experience working with state grant programs. And then the last piece is looking at a total cost evaluation. So we have a maximum of 50 points. Basically, the way that this works is that we take the lowest bid that we have received, multiply it by 50, and then divide it by the total cost of your proposal. So there's more information about this in the RFP, but something to keep in mind. And then we also do have extra points that are available for disabled veteran business enterprises. This is something that is not required for sure, but if you are eligible, we encourage you to get certified. And the information here below is also available in the RFP, which I'll let you review in your at a later date. We can go to the next slide, which also talks about small business points as well. So we, again, for small businesses, have a cost preference of 5%. And this is something that you can also certify, get certified with the Department of General Services on. So another thing to keep in mind. And then we'll just go through the timeline quickly. The written question submittal deadline is actually today at 5 o'clock. Please do send us any questions that come up. You can send them to our email address at ta@sgc.ca.gov. That's available in the RFP and also at the end of this presentation. We will continue as much as possible to respond to questions after this deadline if they come up, especially if they're urgent or if there's something that really needs to be clarified. But we really ask you as much as possible to send them in on time so that we don't have to post multiple Q&A documents, which just ends up being confusing for bidders sometimes. So we will look to post the Q&A document on the 3rd. The deadline for the proposal is April 17th. I just wanted to note we are aware that this is a really challenging time for a lot of folks who are working from home and trying to balance a lot of different things, and we understand that this can be a hard time to meet deadlines. However, unfortunately, our encumbrance deadline for these funds makes it so that we can't really push out the deadline. Please let us know if you think it's really going to be impossible for you to meet this deadline. But I think from what we've been hearing from our contracting folks, it seems like it's probably going to be very challenging for us to push it back. The Department of General Services is very backed up because they have been receiving a lot of contracts for other things now related to COVID-19. And so here in this timeline, we have approximately 10 business days turnaround, but we've been hearing that it could be up to 20 days. So it may actually push back potentially the approximate start date by a few weeks. But again, we don't really know for sure. And then with that, I think we can wrap up this portion. As we mentioned, feel free to contact us with any questions that you have via email, but we will be here also to respond to questions on this webinar. And then there's also a note here about the public comment period closing on April 3rd for the draft requirements criteria for the STEP program. So please keep an eye on that. And the final solicitation will tentatively be released in June for STEP. So with that, we are open to questions.
Great, thanks, Ina. I've been seeing some questions come in through the written questions, so I'm gonna go ahead and go through those first. Keep your hand raised if you want to say a question out loud, and I'll come back to you after we go through these first questions. All right, so I'm going to start from the beginning and cover anything that we missed the first time around. So this is from Brian Barnacle. The cost part of the proposal is really dependent on the number of applicants supported, and the number of applicants estimated is 10 to 30. The assumption bidder uses could have a significant impact on their overall proposal cost. Can you provide a specific estimate so that cost proposals are using the same key variable?
I think that is something that I would maybe punt a little bit more to program staff. I think we definitely recognize that that is a challenge, but I think just because of the nature of this kind of work, it is really hard to know the answer to that question. I don't know if Bree or Leslie, you have thoughts on that, but I think it really isn't going to be possible for us to know for sure how many applicants we will receive, and we want to make sure that we provide assistance to all of the applicants that come forward. It is a relatively common practice in the technical assistance contracts that we've put out so far that we don't necessarily know how many applicants there'll be. So, you know, estimates are definitely okay. I don't know if Bree or Leslie, you want to weigh in.
Sure, Leslie, let me know if you have anything to add.
Go ahead, Bree.
We've been really struggling to figure out how many potential applicants we might have. We don't really have anything to base this on since this is a new pilot. So we are probably unable to give a better estimate at this time. I like the idea of just like putting something out there as like a number that all contractors can use to like even the playing field on a bid. So that's might be worth looking into in the future, but I think we're stuck with this range for now. Moving on, why does another from Brian Barnacle, why does task 4 timeline extend to March 2022? Leslie or Ina, either of you can answer that one.
Yeah, I mean that's the deadline for the project to end, the final encumbrance, and the TA provider will continue to provide information on grant opportunities throughout that period. Bree, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so that's you're right. That's for the planning grant support, and we anticipate that technical assistance providers will provide information to planning grant recipients. So this is not just applicant support for the planning grants, but also recipient support, which is why it goes up until basically all the funds for the TA provider have to be expended.
And I can just say too that that date is also just our expenditure deadline for the funds, and so we wanted to extend it out as long as we could.
Thanks. We have a question from Omar Hernandez. It might have already been addressed, Ina, in your comments, but is there DVBE or SBE incentives for proposers?
Yes, there is. I think that that is hopefully sufficiently addressed in the slides, but if you have additional questions on that, let us know. I may not be the right person to answer very specific questions about that, but I can always, if you write them in, we can work with contracts folks to get answers to your questions posted.
A question from Brian Barnacle. 4B, 4C, and 4D have multiple points of overlap pertaining to activities, management, and outputs. Can you provide more clarity about what you do and do not want to see in each of these sections?
Can we go back to that slide, actually, Bree?
Sure. Which?
I think that was the evaluation slide. I think it's this one. Is that right? Is this what?
I think you might be talking about the tasks.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Sorry.
I could be wrong. Brian, if you have any clarification, otherwise, like.
Do you want to maybe unmute Brian and then we could just ask?
He just said yes, the tasks.
Oh, okay, got it.
We might have to go back and look at exactly which tasks those are. I think that they're planning grant ones, but B, C, and D, I couldn't tell you right now. which ones those are. So we can take a look at those and then provide a written response later for everyone. We have a question from Robert Dean. Could you clarify operating expenses? Are these direct costs like meeting supplies or something additional?
Operating expenses, yeah, are generally kind of overhead costs. So the kinds of costs that you'll need in order to, to carry out the TA.
We have a few questions from Omar Hernandez, so I'll go through them one at a time. Ina, this might be for you. Will you be providing a list of attendees to this conference call?
Yes, absolutely.
And then another one for you. Is the 5% for DVBE and another 5% for small business?
Yes. So
up to 10% total.
Yep. So you can potentially qualify for both. Yes.
Okay. Will you still need hard copies or can we do electronic submissions?
I believe that we can. Good question. Let me double check on that. We will put that in the Q&A document.
Okay, great. And we got that same question from Neil Meyer. A question from Jewel de Guzman. Will SGC have a landing page for the STEP solicitation to provide basic information on the process, or will this need to be developed by the TA team? I can actually take that. The STEP is a CARB program, so CARB has the landing page for the solicitation, so that won't be going through SGC, and we already have that developed. So the technical assistance provider will just be kind of doing the communication with the TA or with the applicants and recipients, but CARB will handle all the basics of putting out a solicitation, including a lot of the outreach for getting applicants. Just a comment from Brian Barnacle. I totally understand, based on our previous comments, I totally understand that you cannot say with certainty about the ranges for the number of applicants, but the proposal cost can be skewed. It's more just so we can all use the same variable.
We'll think about that and see if there's a way that we can address that. I will say, you know, we try to be flexible as much as possible. I think technical assistance by its very nature, we do need to be flexible. And so there are always times that come up when we need to move a little bit of funds from one task to another. And that means we just need to work with our contracts team to make that possible. So yeah, I think that's unfortunately kind of the nature of TA and particularly working on a pilot, but we will think about if there's a way for us to provide a little bit more clarity on that.
This does make me think that one of the things that would be really helpful to see in a scope is something that like can help us understand what the technical assistance provider would prioritize if there were a lot more applicants than we expect, or if there are a lot fewer applicants, what the full scope of technical assistance you could provide is. There might be kind of some sort of scale based on how many applicants we get.
Yeah, that's good.
I think we answered some of these questions already from Michael and Sean. We're going to email out the slides, and the list of webinar attendees will be shared in that email as well. We've got a question from Ann Thomas, which might kind of be the same thing, but if a person or organization might want to join a team, is there a list to join or a way to introduce yourself?
Yeah, actually, you know what? We have created a LinkedIn like networking hub that we can send around a link to, and folks are very much encouraged to join. We were really trying to be able to sort of support some of this networking so that contractors can work together on proposals. So that is one place, and we post there other technical assistance opportunities that we have at SGC as well. So that can be a good thing to join as well. We'll send around that link.
Great. We've got a question from Michael Terreri that I'd be curious on both of your inputs. For TA support, what preference does the program have for the number of in-person meetings versus remote support? Is there a desire to have an in-person meeting for every organization?
I think that's a good question. If I remember correctly, I think that we did have something in there about having at least one in-person meeting with each one.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah, so I think, that's generally a best practice that we've seen across our technical assistance work is it can be really hard actually to do really good technical assistance, especially if we're looking for community engagement to do remotely. So yeah, we will look for some travel costs to be able to go and travel at least once.
Great. Yeah, I would just add that like whatever is in, prioritize whatever is in the scope in the RFP. I think for the recipients, for the implementation grant recipients, in-person meetings are definitely important. And I know we put that in there because we anticipate that you'll be working with them over a longer period of time to help them implement the project.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a similar question from Robert Dean and Sean Edgar based on your response to the question about operating costs. What's the difference between operating costs and overhead costs?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for actually bringing me back to that question. So operating costs could be things like travel, for example, the per diem, things like that. And then, yes, as was mentioned before, if there are, workshops, although I'm not sure necessarily in this case that would be as relevant, but it's all of those kinds of costs that you'll need to do in order to actually do the work, separate from the labor rates and fringe benefits. And then overhead costs is all of sort of the administration costs that you have to do in order to keep your organization up and running.
Thanks. We've got a question from Omar Hernandez. I'm not sure whether I completely understand it, Omar, so if you can type in any clarification or raise your hand, or I can unmute you, but he says, can you state whether some of the attendees are primes or subs?
Oh, so that is, I think that he means whether they'll be sort of the prime contractor or a subcontractor. I think that, we're hoping that folks can reach out to each other. We will send out the list of attendees and encourage you to join the networking hub. We don't know actually who is planning on putting in a bid, so we'll really, that'll be important for you all to reach out to each other and put together bids.
Great. Got a question from Gary Shu. Are there any rules regarding setting of labor rates, like dollars per hour per category?
There are not. We do allow a loaded rate, and there's hopefully the attachment 13, the budget sheet will be helpful in that. But yeah, we don't have specific labor rates that we set. We just ask you to keep in mind the cost evaluation that we do.
Thanks. Those are all the questions we've had written in so far. Anyone raising their hands? I see, Brian, you have your hand raised. I'm going to unmute you. Let me know if, I know that was a while ago, so let me know if you don't want your hand raised anymore or you don't want to speak.
Yeah, sorry, you answered my question.
Okay.
I would just echo that it'd be great to, it's not about having clarity on the number of applicants we'll be supporting, but just for the proposal, it's good to have just a number so that we're all using apples to apples numbers. But I really like the idea of prioritizing the services and things like that too. That's a good alternative. So thanks for that creative idea.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anything else? We'll maybe wait one more minute to see. Brittany. Okay. Brittany Brown has a question. Will the communities receiving TA also have a budget for engagement? I'm imagining the applicants will want to hold community meetings to prepare their applications. Leslie, do you want to take that or shall I?
I think I recall that there is a budget for engagement. I just have to find it within the RFP. You know, off the top of your head, Bree?
So communities do have, STEP will be paying for community engagement during the implementation of the grant, but we're not providing funds to do any community engagement prior to submitting a proposal or prior to receiving the grant. So that unfortunately at this point is going to have to come out of the community pockets. One thing to note is that's part of the reason we're trying to start these planning and capacity building grants that can, if a community hasn't done a lot of that engagement that is necessary to submit an implementation grant, the planning and capacity building grant could be a good place to start, and that's where we could be able to fund a lot of those community meetings that will have to happen to put forward an implementation grant proposal. So hopefully that helped get at your question. I guess I'll also just mention that once the communities have been selected, we really encourage the TA provider to be working directly with community groups and community-based organizations in those selected communities and supporting them in any number of ways to continue to do that community engagement, because the community engagement shouldn't be ending, you know, when the proposal is submitted. We have a question from Michael Terreri. Has the STEP application, which will be supporting applicants on, been shared to estimate costs to complete? Leslie, do you want to take that one?
Say it again. I'm sorry.
Has the STEP application been shared yet?
The STEP application itself has not been shared yet, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the deadline? What's the anticipated date?
So we'll be sharing the application when we put out the solicitation, which will be after we'll have selected a technical assistance provider. So we can't actually use that to help you estimate costs. What we have put out is a document that has draft requirements and criteria for the program. We're currently accepting public comment on that document. We can include the link to that in the email that we send out to all of the attendees. That should give you a good understanding of what we're trying to accomplish with STEP and what kinds of things we're expecting of the applicants. All right. What else? Any other questions, everyone? I'm not seeing anything coming up.
Looks like there might be a question.
Oh yeah, there are more. There we go. Chelsea Hassenauer. Is there a specific points value associated with the list of preferred skills or experience?
as part of the evaluation process, yes, if you look at the table, it's a total of 100 points that are available, and there are point values for each one. We did put up a slide about that, but then also in the RFP, you can find that table.
And Michael Terry just had a follow-up comment that it's helpful for TA providers to see the types of forms, page length of the narrative, etc., in an application to better understand the level of effort that it will take per application. That's a good comment. We have a list of components that we'll be looking for in each step proposal. So hopefully that can help. That I don't anticipate changing too much based on the public comments that we've received thus far. Chelsea Hassenauer had a follow-up question, Ina. She said those points seem specific to the minimum skills / experience. So just wondering whether there are specific points allocated to the additional preferred skills that are above the threshold.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's a good point. So we don't have specific allocation for the preferred points in the scoring. It's really, I think it's something that we will take into account, and in some of the scoring, maybe if we can go back actually to that table.
Sure.
Some of the preferred things I think are a part of actually, oh, there we go. So, you know, some of the subject matter experts with experience working with communities and equitable community engagement. One of the preferred skills was community engagement. You know, building capacity. I think, you know, there are some definite connections between those things, and they're things that we will take into account, but there aren't specific point scores. Yeah, that's a good question.
Great. From Gary Shu, would SGC allow the use of other capable GIS software alternatives to ArcGIS?
I think that's actually probably a question for CARB, based on what kinds of things you're looking for in the STEP proposals.
Let me get back to you on that. My initial thinking is that we'd really like, one of the reasons we want a technical assistance provider is to be able to help build capacity in the communities that are applying for funding. And so that means that we want technical assistance providers as much as possible to support, teach, whatever the case may be, applicants to be able to put these types of applications together themselves. And that includes, you know, doing the GIS work. And in my experience, ArcGIS is kind of the most widely used one, especially with local government. So we'd have to let's think through a little bit more about what that would mean, and how we at CARB who use ArcGIS will be interacting with that data that you share. And we'll put that in a response in the FAQ document. Okay, thanks Gary for the clarification. He just made a comment that said an example could be free GIS software that still uses industry standard SHP files, shapefiles. Yeah, that's a good thing to be thinking about. Any other questions?
One thing that I'll maybe just say is for anyone, I think everyone's questions were written down, but if ever there was a question or a clarification that you provided orally, we've been taking notes, but if you want to make sure that that gets into the Q&A document, it would be helpful to send us an email with that question written out.
Yeah, and I think also, like Ina said earlier, we're still accepting questions. Anything that's submitted today will make its way into the FAQ document, and we'll still try to, and we won't ignore your questions if they come in later, but the more that we can get today, the better. So we may end early, which is great, and but are still please send us your questions if you have more that you think of later.
Yeah, just want to say thank you to everyone for joining. It was great to see so many folks join the call. And yeah, we're really excited to get everyone's proposal. So thanks so much and happy Friday.
Thank you all.
All right, bye.
All right.